Welcome back to the Post-Separation Abuse Podcast. I'm Danielle Black. This episode is part 2 of the Good Girl Contract series. In part 1, I named the contract and I walked through where it came from. The conditioning, the training that's occurred in childhood. For some of us, that was largely cultural. For others of us, that was enforced with abuse. A nervous system trained to read the room, to anticipate, to overfunction, to earn love through effort. And the empath reframe, that what has been called empathic sensitivity can be for some more accurately trained hypervigilance in a body that had to learn to read danger from a young age. And then there's the contract itself, with its many clauses about being pleasing, useful, never resting, never saying no. Today's episode goes to what I think is the next natural question. That is, what happened when we took the contract into intimate relationships? The specific claim of this episode is that partner selection is not random for those of us who have been shaped by the contract. It's coherent. The men who found us were the men that our training had prepared us for. And the mechanisms that kept us inside those relationships long past the point where other women may have left, those mechanisms are explainable. They're not evidence of our weakness. They're evidence of how the mechanism of the contract conditioning works. This episode will also include what I now understand about my own first marriage. Not specific detail, no personal identifying information, but enough to make the pattern clear and real. I lived inside that pattern, and I think me talking about my own experience is helpful for so many of you. Before we begin, I'd like to invite you to take a slow, deep breath in, to hold it for a few moments, and then slowly release it. To loosen up your body, unclench your hands, your jaw, to lift your shoulders up to your ears, to let them drop, to allow some of the tension that you might be holding in your body to ease, even if just a little bit. I want to start with a reframe that I think matters for a lot of things in this episode. If you've ever asked yourself why you ended up with the person that you ended up with, if you've wondered how someone as intelligent and self-aware as you could have chosen someone who ultimately treated you the way that they did, well, let's answer that question directly. It's not because you've got bad taste in either men or women. It's not that your judgment was broken. It's not that you were blind. Your nervous system was doing what nervous systems do. It was scanning your environment continuously for cues of safety or threat at a level that's below conscious awareness. And what it registered as safe was not what a healthy nervous system registered as safe. Rather, what registered as safe was what was familiar. Your nervous system is not looking for what is healthy. It's looking for what's familiar, what's been normalized. And for many of us, what was familiar was work. If your childhood taught you that love was earned through overfunctioning, then a partner who requires overfunctioning to be in a relationship with, well, that's not a red flag to your nervous system. That feels like home. The intensity of the caretaking demand can feel natural if it matches the operating system that you were trained on. And something else that's relevant here is that a partner who didn't require this level of caretaking, this level of tending to and nurturing, would feel unfamiliar, possibly wrong, possibly boring, possibly unsafe. Your nervous system would not recognize them as a viable partner because they wouldn't activate the muscles that the training, the conditioning built. There wouldn't have been anything to hook into, nothing that felt like the love that you'd been trained to recognise. This is not about preference. It's not about taste. It's not about something that you deliberately chose. Rather, it's the outcome of what the nervous system was calibrated to recognise as feeling familiar, normal, safe, home. You didn't select those partners because you have poor judgment. You selected them because your judgment was operating from an internal map drawn in a childhood where love and effort were the same. Let's broaden things a little bit now, because when people talk about this dynamic, it's commonly spoken about in the context of a single archetype, the wounded man. And that framing does catch part of that picture, but not all of it. The wounded man archetype has many faces, different clothing, same job description for the woman. So let's talk through some of the variants. You might be able to recognise your specific version, even if that classic wounded frame doesn't really align with your personal lived experience. The wounded man, damaged by his past, needs someone to help him heal. Or the emotionally unavailable man, locked away, needs someone patient enough to find the key. The strong, silent man, deep waters, needs someone perceptive enough to see what he doesn't say. The man who's been hurt before, he's guarded, needs someone who won't give up on him the way that others have. The man waiting for the one. Every previous woman has failed him. He needs the woman finally worth the effort. What these variants share is a specific structural feature. He's the difficult one, and you're the one who might reach him. And this is the exact frame that the good girl contract has trained us to answer. Being the one who reaches him is the highest possible expression of being useful, being pleasing, being indispensable, and earning love through what we produce. It's the job description of the contract delivered as romance. Now, that trope does not just describe a particular type of man. It also describes a job description for the woman, and it's a job description written specifically to select for women trained by the contract. Now I'm going to say something about my own first marriage. Through a lot of reflection over many decades, I have come to recognise that I fell in love with my first husband at the tender age of 17, partly because I felt sorry for him. His woundedness was a moth to a flame to my overfunctioning. Now, that phrasing that I just used, that's not accidental. Moth to a flame is exactly right, and it captures something that the culture tends to miss when it talks about this dynamic. The pull was not romantic in the sense that our culture sells. It was chemistry in a mechanical sense. A number of things happen when the trope activates a woman shaped by the contract. First, the caretaking role's familiar. We were built to anticipate and meet needs. A partner requiring anticipation and meeting needs feels natural. This isn't a fluke of attraction. It's our operating system finding its use. Second, the potential versus reality gap creates a specific kind of hope. We fall in love with a version of him that doesn't yet exist. That version is compelling precisely because it's only available via our effort, which means that every day that we stay is an investment in the person he could be. And every day he doesn't become that person is not evidence that he never will. Rather, it's just evidence that we haven't done enough. Next, the occasional glimpses of the potential version can be very real. He is sometimes the man that we really thought we were seeing. Those moments aren't manufactured. They're not hallucinations, and we will circle back to why that matters. because the intermittence of those moments is the mechanism that can make leaving so hard. Lastly, the cultural script celebrates the woman who saves the broken man. And this piece is much bigger than many conversations about this particular dynamic acknowledge. This trope is not just in bad romance novels. It runs through some of the most enduring literature. Jane Eyre, Wuthering Heights, Pride and Prejudice in a subtler form, Rebecca, Beauty and the Beast, as the archetypal fairy tale version, the tortured hero redeemed by the right woman. That narrative runs through 2 centuries of the literature that shaped what we understand real love to look like and feel like. Now, this is not a criticism of the literature. Loving those books does not make anyone unsophisticated. It makes them someone whose emotional literacy is likely highly developed. Sophisticated readers respond to sophisticated fiction. And naming that the trope exists in the books, the narratives, the storylines that we love is important because it makes the training visible in a form that many of you might not have looked at directly. Your favourite movie, your favourite novel, the song you can't listen to without crying, all of it potentially an expression of the same trope operating through different forms. Romance publishing is the largest selling genre in fiction, generating huge revenue every year. And the wounded man trope is one of its core structural features. This means that when we talk about the cultural conditioning that we referred to in the previous episode, part 1 of this series, this is what it looks like in practice. Thousands of hours of exposure to a specific fantasy about who women are supposed to be for men. A specific product sold to us relentlessly from adolescence onwards. Now, this is not about giving up the literature that we love or the films that we love, but it's about being able to hold it with awareness, to recognise that the trope in the story doesn't require us to stop loving the story, but it can change what we're able to see in it. Something else that I think is relevant here is that his woundedness might be real. Some men do carry genuine trauma, genuine neurodivergence, genuine mental illness, genuine difficulty. His humanity is not in question, and real difficulty does not create an obligation to endure it. Being autistic does not make it acceptable to control your partner. Having a personality disorder does not remove the obligation to take responsibility for behaviour. Having a troubled past does not entitle a man to a present world in which the woman he loves absorbs the cost of his unresolved history, his unresolved pain. The contract has trained and conditioned us to hear his challenges and difficulties and troubles are real in a way that means that our discomfort and pain isn't. It's trained us to think that we have to keep trying, that leaving would be cruel, that the difficulty explains the harm and therefore the harm should be tolerated. Now, it's important to be clear here that he may need help, but you're not required to be the source of it. Offering yourself up as that source can harm both of you because it removes his need to seek help from anyone else and it costs you what you deserve. It costs you the life that you're entitled to. His woundedness can be context for who he is, but it's not an exoneration for what he's done or continues to do. Something else important here, because a coercive controller who understands what he's looking for in a partner will position himself using every element of the wounded man script. A wounded backstory, the claim to be misunderstood, the suggestion that other women haven't seen him properly, the strategic glimpses of a better self, the framing of difficulty as trauma that requires patient understanding. Now, not all wounded men are coercive controllers, but a coercive controller who has learned this script will use it deliberately because it selects with very high accuracy the woman that he requires, the woman who's been conditioned by the contract, who's been trained since childhood to hear this particular wounded man script as a call to action. And we don't choose these guys because we're drawn to danger. We choose them because our nervous systems recognised the shape of the work and because the culture told us that that work is love. Something else that I think it can be important to talk about really honestly, but that can land uncomfortably, is that for a real period of time in these relationships, the martyrdom can actually feel good. Not just tolerable, but good. I remember back in my first marriage, working full-time and also being responsible for all the domestic labour. And I took pride in it. Every night dinner was on the table when my then husband walked in the door. And not just any dinner fit for a king. I loved it when he bragged to his friends how well I looked after him. It made me feel special. It made me feel purposeful. It made me feel needed. It made me feel like I'd figured out how to make this arrangement work when other women might have failed. I'm sharing this because I think some of you might have also been quietly carrying shame about similar feelings. About at one point in time being happy in the relationship that ultimately hurt you. At one point in time, perhaps like me, feeling pride for things that you now recognise were actually grinding you down. That pride wasn't stupidity. It wasn't evidence of our complicity. It was the contract paying out on the terms that it had trained us to invest in. Every clause was being fulfilled. In my situation, I was indispensable. I was needed. I was doing it well. And I was being praised. The fulfillment produced the emotional payoff that the contract had always promised. Not love. Not really. Rather something closer to, see, I'm doing it right. I'm worthy. I'm the one who can make this work, which is exactly what the contract has trained us to reach for. So, of course, we feel good when we get it. Being needed is one of the most basic human experiences of value. And there's nothing wrong with wanting that. There's nothing wrong with enjoying that feeling. But being always needed and always being available, it's not sustainable. Not for anyone. It's not how any nervous system or any human being can operate over time. And when that labour, that emotional labour as well as physical labour, when that's not reciprocated, resentment builds. Not because we're bad, but because we're human. Every human who overgives without reciprocity eventually will feel resentment. And that's just a function of being alive. It's not a defect of our characters. There's additional layers on top of that unsustainability. And that is that the labour is not just unreciprocated. Rather, the labour is also expected. There's a version of masculine socialisation that trains men to receive women's labour as owed rather than gifted, which means those of us who are overfunctioning, we're not receiving gratitude for exceptional effort. We're receiving expectation for baseline performance. That then raises the ceiling of what we have to deliver in order to get any acknowledgement at all. And in the abusive versions of this dynamic, the acknowledgement stops arriving altogether and disrespect arrives in its place. Not because we've stopped delivering, but because the arrangement was always structured to consume, not to reciprocate. And the moment that we can't deliver at the raised ceiling, the raised threshold, or the moment that we just no longer want to, well, the arrangement reveals what it always was. Overfunctioning combined with a partner who's receiving in an entitled way, plus no reciprocity, plus abuse, that's never going to work out. Eventually, it stops working in ways that can't be ignored. And it's often not because we finally realise that we deserve better, but rather our nervous systems just simply cannot keep paying the premium on a contract that was never going to deliver what we thought it was. So what happens when a woman shaped by the good girl contract meets a man shaped by a specific version of masculine entitlement? What happens when our training has produced an operating system that runs on being needed, and his training has produced an operating system that runs on being the centre of the universe? What a perfect pairing, an entitled man and a woman who needs to be needed. The contract on one side and its complement on the other, neither of them choosing it, both of them delivering it, and the arrangement doing exactly what the arrangement was structured to do. This is not chemistry in the romantic sense. It's chemistry in the mechanical sense, two elements meeting under specific conditions and producing exactly the reaction that we could predict. Nothing mystical, nothing fated, just two sets of conditioning that fit together in a way that lets the arrangement continue for often far longer than it should. The way out is not to become better at spotting entitled men, narcissistic men, whatever label you want to put on them. The way out is to recognize and interrupt the contract within yourself so that you stop being what they're looking for. That pattern needs two people to run. You change one and the pattern just simply can't sustain itself. And that's what we're going to be unpacking in further episodes of this Good Girl Contract series. Recognizing the pattern is not in and of itself a call to leave a relationship. Rather, it's a call to look honestly at what you're doing and what the relationship is asking of you, and to decide from clarity rather than hope. Some people listening to this will look at the relationship and will stay. Some will look and leave. Some have already left. All of those things are legitimate responses. It's not for me to tell anyone what they should or shouldn't be doing in their relationship, but reflecting, being honest with ourselves, that's important. There's a name for what happened to our nervous systems in these relationships, and it comes from behavioural science. The name is intermittent reinforcement, and specifically, variable ratio reinforcement schedules. It was described in the mid-20th century by a behavioural scientist named B.F. Skinner, and it's one of the most robust findings in the entire discipline. Replicated across species, replicated across contexts. It's not opinion, it's established behavioural science. The finding is this: unpredictable rewards create stronger, more persistent behavioural attachment than consistent rewards. If a reward is predictable, you can walk away when you've received what you came for. If a reward is unpredictable, if you're not really sure when it's going to arrive, only that sometimes it does, you don't walk away, you keep trying. The everyday example is gambling. Tats lottos, scratchies, pokey machines. If the pokey machine paid out every fifth go, people would more likely stop after they'd won. But because the pokey machine pays out unpredictably, sometimes on the second go, sometimes on the 200th, the person keeps playing, not despite the uncertainty, but because of it. The relationship application is exactly the same. In a relationship where warmth, connection, the appearance of the good version, the promised version, the ideal version, when the appearance of that's unpredictable, sometimes today, sometimes not for weeks, our nervous systems respond exactly the same way, not by concluding that the warmth is unreliable, but by working harder to produce it, by sticking it out. Every now and then you'd get thrown a bone and it would feel wonderful, and so we stay, and the cycle continues. A bone being thrown occasionally is not a small thing, it's part of the mechanism. This is why the good girl learns to hustle harder when love goes cold, rather than concluding that the love was never really available on the terms that we needed. Because the mechanism is rewarding the hustling, not consistently, but just enough to keep the nervous system locked in. And here's the piece that I want you to hold on to, and it's not new. Your first experience of intermittent reinforcement was in childhood. Was in moments where love was conditional and unpredictable, where being good enough on any given day was not necessarily guaranteed to produce the response that you needed. For so many women, the pattern was set long before you met any romantic partners. Abusive partners were just operating in a reinforcement schedule that our nervous systems had already been calibrated to. And this is why the reframe matters. We didn't stay in these relationships because we were stupid, because we were foolish, because we were weak. We didn't stay because we didn't love ourselves enough. We stayed because we were in a reinforcement pattern that the behavioural science tells us is one of the most persistent behavioural attachments a nervous system can form. The persistence of your staying is not evidence of weakness. It's just evidence of how this mechanism works. It's evidence of your humanity. You didn't stay because you were stupid. You stayed because you were exactly the person that the mechanism was designed to keep in its clutches. Important to mention here as well is that you weren't chosen by an abusive partner because there's something visible on your forehead. It's not because you did anything wrong, but the contract, the conditioning of the contract, can produce visible patterns that certain men, even certain women, if we're talking about same-sex relationships, know how to read. What does this pattern look like from the outside? Over-attunement, quick to be warm, a willingness to be useful, over-explaining ourselves, an absence of a firm no. The way that we shape ourselves, contort ourselves to the person in front of us within minutes of meeting them. A coercive controller can read that pattern quickly and not consciously in most cases, often as an instinct honed through their history of what's worked before, a recognition of a shape that they've succeeded with previously. The men most likely to select women who have been shaped by the good girl contract are men whose own training produced a complementary pattern. Men who need to be central, who need their emotional state to be the organising fact of the relationship, who need someone whose default mode is anticipating and managing their needs. Terence Real, who has written extensively on masculine socialisation, describes this pattern from the men's side. The contract training selects for the men who select for the contract. I know, that's confusing, so I'll say that again. Our training, part of the good girl contract, trains us to select the very men who select us because we've been conditioned by the contract. And importantly, this is not evidence that you have a target on you for life. Rather, it's evidence that the pattern selects for what complements it, which is why interrupting this pattern, well, first acknowledging it so that then we can interrupt it, that changes who is drawn to us. The men or women who select for those of us conditioned by the contract are not going to choose a woman who is no longer visibly operating from it, because the pattern that their instinct is trained on won't be there for them to hook into. That's an important shift. I want to spend the last part of this episode on something that gets talked about, I think, a lot less than the patterns of what went wrong. And that is what receiving love actually feels like from the other side of the contract. Here's what nobody warned me about and what I want to mention to you now. Brené Brown, in her research on shame and vulnerability, made a finding that surprised her. She said that the most compassionate people she had interviewed across many years of research were also ultimately the most boundaried. That was not what she'd expected. She had assumed that compassion and boundaries were in tension with each other. But her data showed that they were very similar. The people who could say no cleanly, without over-explanation or apology, were the ones who had the capacity left over for genuine compassion when they said yes. Boundaryless people burned out and became resentful. Boundaried people had reserves. Boundaries were what protected those reserves. I mention that finding because I think it applies here. A partner who's not operating from the contract, who's not selecting for a woman shaped by the contract, will be someone whose emotional life likely has boundaries, not walls, boundaries. They won't require you to organise your life around managing their emotional state. They'll manage their own. They will have their own life. They will offer connection rather than requiring your physical or emotional labour. This means that healthy relationships will feel different from what your nervous system has likely been trained to recognise as love. They'll probably feel far less intense, less dramatic, less of the finally being seen sensation that the contract taught you to recognise as evidence of a deep connection. They'll be more consistent, more reliable, maybe more boring in the sense of nothing major needing to be managed. And, here's a bit of a warning. To a nervous system that's been calibrated, trained, conditioned by the good girl contract, this can initially feel wrong. Not exciting, not real, not love. Because our nervous system was trained to recognise intense caretaking as love. The absence of that can feel like something's just off. But what feels wrong might actually be what feels right to a nervous system that's never been trained or conditioned by the good girl contract. Even when you meet someone whose love for you is not conditional on your performance, your nervous system may not immediately trust it. You might marvel at it, wonder at it, doubt it, fear it, ask over and over, what if one day I'm not enough? And the person offering the love will keep answering you in every way they can find, and you'll keep asking because your nervous system is not yet ready to receive what it's being given. That can be its own work. It's not failure, it's not evidence that you don't deserve what you have, it's part of the rewiring. The muscle to receive that love that doesn't have to be earned, that can take years to build, sometimes many years. The reality is that the training that we received with the good girl contract, that doesn't recognise ordinary unconditional love as real love. It only recognises earned love, which means that love that arrives without conditions can feel, at the level of our nervous systems, like something that we just can't really trust. I know women who have been inside relationships with partners who love them for who they are, who have spent years unable to fully receive that love because their nervous systems, the nervous systems that were calibrated by the contract, just didn't know how to fully receive that love. It took time. It took their partner patiently answering the same doubt. It took the woman noticing the doubt each time that it rose up, refusing to let it control the relationship. Taking time to recognise healthy love, that's not a failure. It's what shedding the conditioning, the training looks like. Dan Siegel, who has spent years studying attachment neuroscience, has documented what is called earned secure attachment. The finding is that adults who experienced insecure or disorganised attachment in childhood can develop secure functioning in adulthood through relationships with securely attached others, through structured self-work, and through the ongoing practice of noticing when old patterns want to talk them out of what's being given. This is important because this means that the rewiring of attachment, that's been documented. The nervous system that's been trained by the contract can actually be trained and calibrated by something else, something healthier, something genuine, not overnight, but eventually. I realise that this episode might have been a lot, especially for anyone who's recognised themselves in what I've been describing. If any part of what I've said today has landed in a way that's been surprising or maybe unsettling, you might want to sit with it for a little while. Step back, take a break, if that's possible for you. Come back when you can. All of this will still be here. Thank you so much for being here with me for this conversation. I value your time, and I appreciate deeply that you're willing to sit with conversations that can sometimes be complicated, can sometimes be challenging, can sometimes be difficult, can sometimes ask you to reflect on your situation through a different lens. I look forward to chatting with you again soon.
There's a moment where the noise stops landing, where the chaos loses its hold.
That's it for today's episode of the Post-Separation Abuse Podcast. If you found this helpful, you'll love the Post-Separation Parenting Blueprint, the foundation of everything that my team and I teach, now available to all protective parents. Whether you work with us one-on-one or navigate your journey independently, the blueprint is where everyone starts. Whether you're thinking about separating, in the early stages of separation, wanting to avoid your kids being trapped with unsafe or inappropriate care arrangements, or perhaps needing to challenge and change current arrangements, and even if you're currently in the court system for parenting matters. I created the blueprint because the journey of being a change maker and a cycle breaker can't be done alone, and the blueprint is the one post-separation parenting resource that gets it right. Child development, safety and well-being put first, with the evidence to back it up. The blueprint gives you the same strategic frameworks that my team and I use in private one-on-one coaching, and it's available on an online platform for you to access whenever and wherever you need. You can also ensure that you're up to date with any new announcements by checking in regularly to the website danielleblackcoaching.com.au. Until next time, take care. And please always remember, you are your child's greatest protector.
You're rewriting the meaning of why. Calm is credible, steady and strong. You don't have to fight the same way for long. You protect, you lead, you rise with fire in your bones and truth in your eyes. This is how it begins, not in chaos but clarity within. You protect, you lead, you rise. This isn't revenge, this is design, a future rewritten line by line. You don't burn it down, you build it right with wisdom, strategy, and quiet mind.